we have systems now that detect AI text, AI audio, AI images, AI video. Give us the nuts and bolts of how you detect these fakes.
So what you have to understand about generative AI deepfakes is that it is fundamentally learning how to generate images, audio, and video by looking at patterns in billions and billions of images, audio, and video.
Okay.
But it doesn't know what a lens is. It doesn't know what the physics of the world is. It doesn't know about geometry. It doesn't know about the physical world. It's not recreating this thing that you and I are in right now.
Right.
Take any image outdoors. Sunny day here in Virginia. Go outdoors, and because the sun is shining, you will see shadows all over the place.
Yeah.
And those shadows have to follow a very specific law of physics, which is that there's a single dominant light source, the sun, and it is giving rise to all those shadows.
Right.
So we have geometric techniques that can say, given a point on a shadow and the part of the object that is casting it, tell me where the light is that's consistent with that. And we can do that not once, not twice, not 3 times, but as many times for shadows that we find.
For every shadow in the
every
image.
shadow. And if we find that they are not converging on a single light source, the sun, then we have a physically implausible scene. Yeah.
It seems like that would be easy for AI to figure out and do.
You would think, but here's why I can't. Because what I described to you is a 3-dimensional process. That's happening in the 3-dimensional world. But the AI lives in 2D. It lives in a 2-dimensional world. And reasoning about the 3-dimensional world is not something it does. Now, it can sort of fake it pretty well, the way artists fake it.
Right.
Lots of things in paintings are not physically plausible, but our visual system doesn't really care. We're looking at a pretty picture. So that's one of my favorite techniques. Here's another one that I love. Go outside and, well, you shouldn't actually do this, but stand on the railroad tracks. I don't actually advise doing that. I did this the other day with one of my students, and like, what are you doing standing on the railroad tracks? I wanted to take a picture of railroad tracks. And the reason I wanted to take a picture of railroad tracks is that when you're standing on the railroad tracks, those railroad tracks, of course, are parallel in the physical world, and they remain parallel as long as the track continues going. But if you take a picture of it, those train tracks will converge to what's called a vanishing point. This is a notion that Renaissance painters have understood for hundreds of years. And why is that? It's because when you photograph something, the size on the image sensor is inversely proportional to how far it is from me. So as the train tracks recede, it looks like they're converging. Right? This is called projective geometry, a vanishing point. It's a very specific geometry. And this is true of the parallel lines on the top and bottom of a window, on the sides of a building, on a sidewalk, anything that you have a flat surface, like this table that we're at. Take a photo of this table, and all these parallel lines will converge to a vanishing point. So we can make those measurements in an image, and when we find deviations of that, something is physically implausible. The image is violating geometry. Okay. All right. Let me move to a sort of different side of it. This is actually one of my favorite techniques. Is when you go to your favorite AI system and you ask it to make an image, it will create all the pixels, but then it has to bundle it up into a JPEG image or a PNG image or some format. And it actually does that in a very specific way. And so here's an analogy. When I buy something from an online retailer, there's the product I get, but that product is also packaged in a box. And different retailers have different ways of doing it. Apple has a very specific way of doing beautiful packaging. Other retailers, just shove it in a box and send it off. So the packaging, when I create an image on OpenAI or on Anthropic or on Midjourney, all these different generators, they package it up differently. And it's different than the way my phone packages up the pixels. And it's different than the way Photoshop packages up the pixels. So when we get an image or an audio or video for that matter, we can look at the underlying package and saying, is this a packaging that is consistent with OpenAI or Anthropic or a camera or whatever it is? And
so it doesn't have package emulators?
Yeah, it does not. It doesn't know about it because it doesn't care. Why would you care about it? I'm the only person in the world who probably cares about this. You certainly don't care how it's packaged because what do? You open the package, you throw it away, and you got your product.
That's right.
The image. Right? So we can look at the packaging. There's a whole nother set of techniques so everything I've described is sort of after the fact. Right? You wait for the content to land on your desk and you start doing these analyses. Right? There's a whole nother set of techniques that are what are called active techniques. So Google recently announced that every single piece of content that comes from their generators, image, audio, or video, will have what's called an imperceptible watermark. So think we don't use currency that much anymore, but take your $20 bill out of your wallet and hold it up to the light, and you'll see all kinds of watermarks that prevent or make it very difficult to counterfeit. So what Google has done is they have inserted an invisible watermark into images, audio, and video at the point of creation that says, we made this. And then when I get that piece of content, I have a specialized piece of software, because we over at GetReal have a relationship with Google, that says, is there a watermark in there? It's a signal, and you can't see it. Right? And the adversary can't see it, but I can see it. So that's really cool. And by the way, if this comes into the phones, so if Apple decides we're going to watermark every single piece of content that is natural, I've got a signal that is built in, right? So we've got lots of different techniques, from things that we rely on third parties like the Googles of the world to measurements that we can make in an image, a video, or an audio. I'll give you one of my favorite audio ones, by the way. So if you're listening to this, you won't be able to see us, but if you're watching this on YouTube, you will know we're in a really nice studio. And there are soft walls around us, and we have really nice microphones. And so the amount of reverberation that you hear is quite minimal. This audio is going to sound really good because you guys are pros here, right? But the amount of reverberation is dependent on the physical geometry around us, how hard those surfaces are. And that should be fairly consistent over an audio. But what you see with AI generation is you see inconsistencies in the microphone and the reverberation, because it's not physically recording these things.
So even in a single recording,
you'll see modulation that are quote unquote unnatural. So a lot of what we do is look for patterns you expect to see that mimic the physical world. Now, and then I talked about the active techniques, the watermarking. And then there's a whole other set of techniques that I'm going to talk about a little, but not a lot, and you'll understand in a minute why not. So the other side of what we do is we try to understand the tools that our adversary uses. So if you're using an OpenAI or Anthropic or some open source code, we actually go into well, we can't do this for OpenAI, but for anything that's open source. So there are so-called face swap deepfakes, where you can take somebody's face, eyebrow to chin, cheek to cheek, and replace it with another face. And these are all open source libraries. We can dig into the code, and we can see, okay, what are they doing? All right, the first thing they're doing is this, and then they do this, and then they do this, and then they do this. And then we'll say, that second step should introduce a very specific artifact. So I'll give you one example, but not more than one. So one of the things that a lot of these swap faces do is they put a square bounding box around the face. They pull the face off, they synthesize a new face, and then they put it back. But when they put it back, it's with a bounding box. And they do it very well. You can't see it, but we know how to go into the video and discover that bounding box that was there. All right, so that's an example where we reverse engineering because we understand how the adversary has made something. Now we have lots of other ones which I don't want to tell you about.
I understand why.
You can see now because it's adversarial.
Exactly. Right. Man, it sounds very systematic. I have a decent understanding now if I want to make a lab to do this. Some techniques to do it, but you know, the average person out there isn't a scientist. How can my mother identify real from the fake in the world of AI?
They can't. And this is the reality of where we are right now. And this is important to understand, because I don't want you to walk away from this podcast thinking, okay, I understand a little bit now. Now when I'm scrolling through, X or Blue Sky or Facebook or Instagram, I'm going to be able to tell. You won't. You won't be able to tell. And even if I could tell you something today that was reliable, 6 weeks from now, it will not be reliable, and you'll have a false sense of security. So I get this question a lot, and the thing you have to understand is this is a hard job. It is really hard to do this, and it's constantly changing. And the average person doom scrolling on social media cannot do this reliably. You can't do it reliably. I can barely do it reliably, and this is what I do for a living.